My name is Segun Idowu. Segun Idowu, because I know you're gonna ask me again. Segun Idowu. I just walk around, and people give me money. That's what I do. No, I'm the I'm the co-organizer of the Boston Police Camera Action Team. Well, about 750 days ago, August 9th, 2014, we all saw the body of Michael Brown laying in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri. And after all the anger and frustration of watching not only that moment, but also watching how the police responded to rightful protest and frustration on how that happened and how that was handled, we decided we should do something to prevent Michael Brown from lying face down on Warren Street or Blue Hill Ave. And so decided that instead of going to Ferguson, we would do our work in Boston to prevent that from happening. I was arrested at a protest, and it was a pretty odd way that it happened where this is one of the first protests that the Boston branch of the Black Lives Matter movement put together. This was in response to the I don't remember the name of it, but either way, they decided not to charge Officer Pantaleo for the murder of Eric Garner. And so we marched from the B2 police station in Roxbury, and from there we marched over towards the expressway, and the state police were already waiting there for us. And so there were white allies in the front, and we decided, for some reason the white allies decided to sit down and make this about prison, because we were right by the prison there, and all of the folks of color were just kind of looking at each other a little confused as to why are you on the ground, because the whole point of you being in the front was to shield us from the police. So we just kind of stepped over them and wound up in the front. And so, we were standing there, and after a little commotion with the state troopers because they had yanked a girl over the line and attacked her, she was bleeding and everything for no reason, the state troopers decided to end it and started yanking people out of the line to arrest. And so I wound up getting arrested for standing there silently with other folks in solidarity. We only had one mission, which is to outfit or to ensure that all of Boston's police officers are outfitted with body cameras, and to also get the policy that we wrote adopted. And as soon as that is complete, we will cease to exist. We have no purpose, and we like it that way. So we have one part of that down, which is the pilot program that began after much fits and starts in September of this year. And we have about 60% of the policy that we put together that's currently guiding the pilot program, but we're pushing for 100% of that for the full program that will come. For instance, officers have autonomy for when they record. In our policy, we delineate what those instances should be. So if they stop you, if they're entering your house, things of that nature, we outline specifically when officers should have the camera on, but then on the flip side, we say when the camera should never be on. And the policy that BPD has right now does a pretty good job of that as well. In our policy, we say that the data should be held for about 6 months to a year, or 3 years or longer if you as a citizen say, I have a complaint, and so you should flag that file. And we also say that it's a third party that should be storing this data. Unfortunately, the police department here in Boston has decided, at least for the pilot, to store the data themselves. It's alarming for two reasons. First, because it's the police, and this tool is meant to not only bring accountability, but transparency. And since the idea is that you can't trust the police to give that transparency, therefore they should not have this data that's supposed to do just that. The other thing is that our police department is pretty old, both in terms of how long it's been around, but also in its members. And like their IT guy is this 60-something-year-old guy who I'm pretty sure doesn't even know how to work a laptop. So that being said, he now controls the data that are coming in through this new technology. So those are the two reasons that that's scary. Also, we say that if you are recorded by this camera, you as the citizen should be able to walk down to the Boston Police Department, or since we live in 2016, fill out an online application and say, I'm the subject of the video. I should be able to see that video, and then it's my property. So if I want to give it to the media, that's where it goes. If I want to put it on YouTube, that's where it goes. But I was the one that was recorded. And of course, this video would have to be edited and block out other faces, whatever. And the one major component in ours that does not exist, or two major components, I should say. One is our policy says that officers cannot review the footage if there is a deadly incident or whatever incident, that officers have to write their report and then they can view the footage after and add subsequent information to the report. The Boston Police Department, unfortunately, allows officers to review the footage prior to writing their report, which is concerning for us because, the New York Times came out with an article that showed how the footage can be manipulated. So they had one person wearing the body camera, and then they had a separate camera that was recording the interactions. And when you look at the body camera footage, it looks like there's a scuffle happening between two people. But then when you see the recorded footage, it's really them just dancing around each other, right? But so point of view matters. But also what it shows is that your brain can manipulate what you're seeing. And so we want to prevent two things with the camera. The first is that watching the video, officers would be able to say, well, this is what happened. And so once your mind has in store that this is what happened, when you watch the video, it's going to fit that narrative. But the other thing is, if an officer watches the footage before writing their report, let's say they enter a home, and unfortunately there's a negative interaction between the officer and the person they're going after, and that person winds up dead, which is too often the case in those instances. And they did that because they feared for their life or whatever, but then in the video see that there's a bag of marijuana on the couch. And let's say they didn't have a warrant or whatever. The officer can look at that footage and say, oh, well, we went in because we noticed the bag of weed and did whatever. Or we saw there was a knife on the couch and thought he was going to go for it. And therefore, that's why I did what I did. When in reality, it was this fear that they have whenever they go into the home of a particular group of people that makes them act the way they do. That should be what's in the report, as opposed to the other stuff that was not in their mind when they did that action. So that, and then the final piece is that our policy has consequences. We didn't make them up. What we did was we tied current rules and procedures that the police already have to consequences for those actions. So not wearing the body camera is a uniform violation. Not turning it on is another kind of violation, et cetera. But these are things that BPD already has in place. We just believe that, this should be spelled out, because every person we talked to when we were asking people in the community, do you want body cameras, said that we need consequences. Not in that language, but at the end of the day, if this is all about accountability, just having the cameras alone doesn't mean anything. The fear is that all of these new policies and procedures are fine, but if there's nothing in place to hold someone accountable for not doing it, then there's absolutely no point, and we agree 100%. So we have consequences in ours. The current policy from the police department just has a line in their policy that says that officers will not be reprimanded for minor infractions of this policy. It does not explain what those minor infractions could be. It is the shortest part of that policy. Everything else is clearly defined. There's just one line regarding how there won't be consequences. So that's the policy that we put together. What we found was that police officers wanted body cameras for a different reason. They would say to us that, for instance, I have a friend that's a state trooper and others that work for the Boston Police Department through other jobs that I've had, getting to know them. And they all say, yeah, we want body cameras because we want the people to see how we get treated. I got pulled over a couple months ago on purpose because I'm trying to find officers that are wearing the body cameras. But and he didn't have one, but I remember asking him, what do you think of body cameras? This is actually kind of how I got out of the ticket. Because he came out like screaming and like, oh, you don't respect me. And it was like really weird. It was night and it was very scary. But I diffused the situation by asking, by the way, what do you think of body cameras? And then he completely changed his tune and said, yeah, I want body cameras. I want people to see how they treat me. Every time I pull someone over, the minute I walk up to their car, they're cussing me out, which was ironic for me because that's what he was doing the minute he got out of his car. But they do feel as if they're under attack, especially given recent events. And so they want the camera selfishly to show that their job is demanding and hard and all that kind of stuff, which I'm sure is true in many respects. But so point is that Boston police officers we spoke to want cameras. The people who did not want the cameras were Pete Rose and his executive staff. They're from the Boston Patrolman Association, Boston Police Patrolman Association, and the Superiors Union and the Detectives Union. They didn't want the body cameras. And these are the groups that at the same time penned a letter to the mayor and the commissioner demanding long guns and body armor for this community that the commissioner had been saying, we don't need body cameras because we get along with the community. We have the best community policing ever. The people trust us. And at the same time, his rank and file officers are saying, yeah, we trust this community so much that we need rifles and body armor and helmets as we patrol these communities. I think right now that we will see what we continue to see, which is officers will in some cases get away, and in other cases it will be so blatantly clear that this officer in cold blood murdered this person that they have to go to trial, that we'll see that stuff like that happen. Cameras aren't the end-all be-all. They're not a panacea. I do think over the long term, though, we'll see that it will be in the financial interest of the police department and the city to prosecute these cases. But we also have to take all this other stuff into account. The fact that, well, who's the person that is charged with bringing cases against police officers? The DA. And the DA has a relationship with the police department. So, how I've seen it is, so for me it was always, sometimes I have a linear way of thinking. So it was body cameras first, and then the presence of that existing leads to XYZ other initiatives. So for me, having body cameras leads to a civilian review board that has subpoena power, which we have something like that in Boston called the Community Ombudsman Oversight Panel or the Co-op, but it's toothless. So all they can do is say, the internal affairs was right or not if you bring a complaint, and they don't have subpoena power, and no one listens to them. They just generate a report, and that's that. So it leads to a civilian review board, and then that leads to us talking about an independent prosecutor to bring cases against officers if things go south between an officer and a civilian. I think all of those things together will lead to much greater accountability for police officers. But I think if we have the system we have right now, you can stick your finger in a dike, but eventually it's going to the dam's going to explode. And so for me, it's all about having all of these things together that will, because we both get frustrated at that kind of stuff happening. But I think in the long term, we'll see more people being held accountable, and then things in the courtroom flipping. So right now, the way things happen in a courtroom is if it's me versus an officer, the court automatically believes the police officer because there's no footage, nothing like that exists, and the officer is above the law and above reproach and the nearest thing to God in society. So of course the officer is not lying. So with the presence of body cameras, though, that's going to flip, because if an officer doesn't record the situation and things didn't go well, and I go to court and I say, well, this happened, and the officer says, no, that didn't happen that way, and the judge or the jury say, well, let's see the body camera footage. and they say, oh, well, I didn't turn it on. Well, then everyone's going to say, well, why didn't you turn on your body camera? And it doesn't matter what excuse they come up with, unless it was like, I was chasing them and, it just happened like that. Aside from that scenario, now everyone's going to be looking at the officer, giving them the side eye and saying, well, you're probably lying then. And now the civilian is the believable person. So I think the long-term presence of cameras is going to lead to something like that in court.